Hi, Caleb. How you doing, mate?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm really good, Caleb. I'm really good. Thanks so much for agreeing to this. I've been a big fan of what you've been doing for quite some time now, and following what you do. And there's a few things that I'd really love to talk to you about. And the first thing, it's something I haven't been able to. I haven't done any videos or anything for the last couple of weeks, so I've been watching the news and not commenting too much on it. I've tried to move away from Twitter and trying to back off and not looking at my mentions, and I'm finding that I'm more sane by doing that. But there's one article that I've sent you a link, and I'll show it on screen now, from The Guardian. And now this was the 27th of November. It came out, and it was written by somebody called Robert Booth, who is the social affairs correspondent. And he says this is the headline to the article. Black Lives Matter has increased racial tension 55%, say, in UK poll. Organisers of Black Lives Matter say findings show movement has exposed pre-existing fault lines. Caleb, according to The Guardian, you can see what they're doing here. It wasn't the killing of unarmed black people in America that led to the rise of Black Lives Matter, and obviously consequently, the killing of these unarmed black people over there. That hasn't led to the rise in racial tensions in the world. It's Black Lives Matter that have caused it. Do you see how they're trying to change what is true here, aren't they?
Indeed, indeed. I mean, yeah, you would think that it would be the realities facing so many people of color and the communities and the rise of a police state that would be driving this unrest, but they want to blame it all on just a protest movement they don't approve of. That's unfortunate.
It's showing, it's highlighting their racism, I think, isn't it? It's highlighting, the reason. I've got a feeling that one of the reasons why they're coming down so hard on the Black Lives Matter movement is that recently over here, a lot of these Black Lives Matter pages and whatever came out in support of Palestine. It hasn't escaped my attention that this movement is really, it's quite progressive, and they're really trying to smear it as much as possible, aren't they?
Indeed. Well, I think it's not surprising that many Black Lives Matter activists might come out in support of Palestine due to the fact that here in the United States, so many of our police officers are actually trained in Israel. The Israeli police provide training and have training programs for our U.S. police. And part of the reason that they have learned to be so hostile with the population is they're getting training from the Israeli police, and they're basically learning to deal with our population here in the United States like the Israelis deal with the Palestinians as like an enemy force. And so it's that whole settler colonial kind of policing tactics, the kind of things we saw in South Africa, et cetera, are being passed on to our U.S. police. Not that there wasn't a huge issue with brutality before that, but I think that they kind of intersect in this way.
You'll get called an anti-Semite if you say that over here, Caleb. You'll get smeared as an anti-Semite. There was a young lady, a politician, her name escapes me now, but she was on the front bench of Labour, and she retweeted an article in The Independent that mentioned the IDF train some American police, and she got called an anti-Semite by Piers Morgan, I think, over here. He said it was the most anti-Semitic thing he'd ever heard of, was her retweeting this article that just mentioned the IDF trained American soldiers. Don't you think that's weird?
That's the most anti-Semitic thing he's ever heard of.
Not 8 million dead Jews.
He really lives under a rock if that's the most anti-Semitic thing he's ever heard of. It's interesting that here in the United States, they have actually made it illegal in a number of states to boycott Israel. And in order to do business in a number of states, you actually have to sign a document saying that you will not boycott Israel. And I would think that even just from like a free market perspective, right? If you're not boycotting somebody, you have to do business with them, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, even somebody who's just completely in favor of capitalism and free markets should say, wait a second, why is someone signing that they won't boycott? That's just outrageous. But in a number of states across the country, that is the law. If you if you don't sign an affidavit that you will not boycott Israel, you don't work with the state.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because they really are cracking down, aren't they, and wrong think and wrong speak. If you say the wrong things on social media platforms right now, you're going to get smeared, and you're going to get attacked, and you're going to get reported, and then you're probably going to get banned. And it's happening more and more. And I really worry about this, Caleb. I really worry about, because history is littered, isn't it, with instances where the shit hit the fan, and then an authoritarian regime took control. And I feel as if we're really in that right now, in that position. Do you feel that that's the case over there?
Well, I feel that there is a particular faction in Silicon Valley that is trying to take power and trying to assert its will over our political process in the United States. And that faction may be more, socially liberal, I guess, than the rest of the ruling class of the United States. But it also seems very, very committed to fomenting global revolution and unrest and chaos around the world. We're still living from the disastrous aftermath of the Hillary Clinton State Department. When Hillary Clinton ran the State Department, coordinating with Jared Andrew Cohen of Google Alphabet, Anne-Marie Slaughter, we had Samantha Power, and what they did in Libya, what they did in Syria. It was just an absolute disaster. And these are forces that really believe that using social media and U.S. domination of the tech giants to just foment chaos around the world is the optimal situation. And it's very, very scary. And it appears that those forces are on their way back to the White House. Kamala Harris was selected by the same people who selected Hillary Clinton. And it looks like we're going to be getting this kind of global revolution, global chaos faction back in the executive branch.
There's two things that I would think from that. First of all, you didn't mention Joe Biden. You went straight to Kamala Harris, which does fit into my theory that he's very unselfishly going to have a stroke before January 20th comes around. But let's face it, he really is suffering mentally, that man. I think there's no denying it. But the other thing is that you mentioned a return to this foreign policy around the world, and it's interesting. It's not Trump that started any wars, and it's Satan Obama, who won the Nobel Peace Prize, who took George Bush's 2 wars and turned them into, is it 8 or 9 that you're bombing now in America?
Who can keep track? There's U.S. There's
probably more
U.S. drone strikes in a lot of different countries. It's pretty outrageous. The government of Libya has been overthrown. There's a military presence in Syria. You name it. There's been U.S. military operations in Yemen. Where the Saudis were already backing the Saudis as they commit horrendous atrocities against the people of Yemen and bomb and destroy that country every day. And
that's what I want to talk to you about.
Yeah, all over the African continent, there's U.S. military forces, and
it's important. It's important here when I say you, America, etc. It's important that people make the two distinctions. A, I'm not talking about the American people. I think the American people are great. And B, I realise that we are right there on your coattails. And in many cases, we're doing basically the public relations for you around the world. It certainly seems to be the case in Syria with this massive propaganda construct that has been erected. But I want to talk to you about Yemen. You've got a unique insight into the Yemen war. It's something that's not talked about over here at all in the news.
Indeed. Well, in 2015, I had the honor of participating in a humanitarian mission with the Red Crescent Society of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I actually went on a ship to try and deliver medical aid to Yemen. And we were unable to complete our mission because the Saudis bombed the port we were supposed to arrive at in Hodeidah 8 times in a single day and destroyed the port. They had Sudanese mercenaries positioned around the port actually to attack us when we arrived with rocket launchers. And so we were forced to turn our ship around and head to Djibouti and turn our medical supplies over to the United Nations Relief Organization. So we hope that it got distributed, but there's a lot of corruption in the UN. But what's happening in Yemen is this essentially, this is a country fighting for its national liberation, right? They had for a long time a dictator, Saleh, and he was a puppet of the Saudis. And during the Arab Spring, he was toppled. And then after the Arab Spring, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia forced a sham election on Yemen in which there was only one candidate on the ballot. And that candidate was Mansour Hadi. And he was the only candidate allowed on the ballot, and they declared him the winner, and he was a Saudi puppet. But the people of Yemen kept fighting. And you've got the Houthi forces in the north. They call themselves Ansar Allah. You've got the Arab Spring Party, which is kind of a secular movement in the urban areas that wants more democracy and more rights. And you've also got the Southern movement of people who want to restore the socialist Democratic People's Republic of Yemen and want to restore socialism in the South. You've got Nasserists, you've got Arab socialists and Baathists. It's a big coalition of people in Yemen who don't want to be a colony of Saudi Arabia any longer. And in American media, they tell us this whole war in Yemen is just a proxy war with Iran. If that was the case, it would have been over in a week. If the people fighting the Saudis in Yemen were simply Iranian puppets, this would have been over quickly. But the fact that one of the poorest countries in the world has just been engaged in all-out war against Saudi Arabia, that has the fourth largest military budget in the world, shows that there's a huge base among the population that simply don't want to be Saudi Arabia's playground, Saudi Arabia's colony any longer. They've got lots of oil in Yemen, but it's staying in the ground. The Saudis want to keep it in their back pocket. But the people of Yemen want to start selling that oil and using it to develop the economy. They looked for inspiration to Venezuela and to Iran and how those countries seized control of their oil resources, used oil exports to build up an independent economy. It's interesting, the logo of the Houthis, you never see that on the internet. You just, on TV, they never show the logo. But the logo, it has a hand holding a gun, and that's supposed to represent God and armed self-defense, but it also has a shaft of wheat. And that logo of the Houthis, that shaft of wheat, stands for economic development. And that's really the people of Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world, are fighting for the independence and the economic development of their country. And that's the issue here. The Saudis want to see Yemen remain a poor, impoverished, underdeveloped country. And the people of Yemen want to break free and they want to develop.
I was just looking at that logo. That's that's interesting that they don't show that. It's important to note, isn't it, that it's Saudi Arabia that they're saying that it's that are at war with Yemen, but this couldn't go on without our say so. When I say our, I mean the United Kingdom and the United States. This war couldn't happen if we just went, no, we're not going to back this war. It couldn't happen because we're not just selling them the weapons here, are we? We're training the pilots. We're picking out the I think Rand Paul over in America said once of the Yemen war, we're doing everything but basically pulling the trigger.
Yeah, there are Pentagon generals in Riyadh. There is U.S. satellite support, basically directing them where to strike. I mean, this is a U.S.-UK proxy war against Yemen. The Saudis are just kind of the middlemen, but that's what they've always been, right? I mean, the House of Saud was selected by the British Empire and British bankers to rule over the Arabian Peninsula, and they always have been. I mean, it was the Sykes-Picot Agreement that established them after World War I and gave them the power and armed them. And their ideology of Wahhabism, the idea that, interpreting Islam in a very specific way, that you have to build an autocratic state like something from the Middle Ages, they were very carefully selected, to be the rulers of that area by Western capitalism and imperialism. The Arab people, let's not forget, have a long tradition of science, and they've made great strides in mathematics and astronomy. And, there was a great enlightenment happening in the Arab world around the time that Europe was still having the Dark Ages. And to say that the backwardness of Saudi Arabia or the Kuwaiti monarchy or these kind of autocratic oil regimes that buy lots of US weapons, that represents the Arab people is just a complete misrepresentation. And it's really kind of unfortunate because I think there are a lot of people that look at that, the more primitive and backward parts of the Arab world and don't like it particularly. And they don't seem to realize that it's Western capitalism and huge multinational corporations that keep those things intact. And the countries that get attacked are countries like Libya, countries like Iraq, countries like Iran that are trying to modernize and trying to develop. In Iran, they've got women that are generals in the military. In Iran, they've got a constitution. They've got multiple parties that run in the elections. I mean, Iran is 1,000 times more democratic and modern than Saudi Arabia is. When I went to Iran, I learned that everything that Americans think about Iran is actually true about Saudi Arabia.
It's interesting you say it's thread of a good idea, isn't it? It's Chomsky's thread of a good idea. They don't want to tell the truth about Syria being this secular country, and actually, you know, you can practice any religion in Syria, you're not persecuted, etc., etc. And whereas if you go to Saudi Arabia and try to do that, you will be stoned to death or thrown off a building or something like that. It's interesting that it's was it Sun Tzu says that you take whatever weakness that you've got and whatever you're guilty of and just throw it on the opposition, and that's what they're doing here, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed. I mean, the Syrian Arab Republic is a country with religious freedom. It's a country with labor unions in the factories and a legal communist party. It's got a Christian community. It's got religious minorities that are protected by the state. And the people who want to overthrow the Syrian government have been very open about the fact that they are fanatical Wahhabi extremists who want to create something like Saudi Arabia. And I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, ISIS emerged from among the U.S.-backed terrorists and extremists trying to overthrow the Syrian government. And you had that Manchester bombing over there in the UK. And the guy who did it, you know, he was somebody who had gone to Libya to fight against Gaddafi, right? And that we have this policy in the United States that we arm and train these, you know, fanatical Wahhabi extremists and unleash them against countries that are trying to develop and modernize, and then they come back and attack us, and then we say, "Oh, I mean, no one can pay attention to this. The fact that maybe arming Al Qaeda is not a smart idea." You know? No,
not at all. I mean, or Saudi Arabia. Look at who you said bombed that port in Hodeidah. You know, that wasn't Saudi. That was Sudanese. These are basically hired mercenaries, aren't they? And you know, when we hire them, they're called moderate rebels, and when Turkey hires them, they're called hired terrorists. And you know, it's just I wish people would start telling the truth from both sides, but you just can't get it in our media at the moment because everything's got a political agenda. I asked the question in one of my latest blog posts. I don't know whether this is something that you've given much thought to, but it's our media that are facilitating all of this, because they're obviously, you know, we can see them, you can see them as well as I'm sure, creating a narrative and creating their own news. For instance, Syria. I'm sure you'll know all about, you know, the source that was used as the point of all things Syria and human rights for the last 5-7 years over here. The Telegraph runoff and the BBC uses the source, and the Guardian and the Mirror, etc. They all use the same source, and that's the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Now, this sounds like a wonderful organization, doesn't it, Caleb? This sounds like might be one of those big umbrella organizations, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. It sounds like they've got points all over Syria where they're just, you know, finding human rights abuses and they're reporting it. No, this is a guy who escaped. He's a Syrian for sure, but that's the only thing Syrian about it. He escaped Syria because he was facing a 4th prison term for fraud, came to the UK, obviously somebody who is anti-Assad because he's been, you know, trying to oust him, etc. The United Kingdom government gave him, I think it was 96 or 196,000 pounds loan for, quote, equipment. He set up the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is a telephone in a house, a 3-bedroom house, I think it is, in Coventry, about 25 miles from here. He's got nothing to do with Syria at all, yet he's the person who is used as the voice of authority. Now, I'm not saying here, Caleb, at all, that this person is up to nefarious no good, at all. From what I can tell in the investigations that I have looked into, he works quite hard and he gets phone calls all over. But from who? He can't check. He's a geezer in Coventry. So why is he the source? It's like, oh, wait a minute. No, you're creating your own news here, aren't you? We can see it, can't we, Caleb?
Well, this is how they do things, right? And so he'll say something that is very, very critical of the Syrian government. He'll make the most wild accusation, and that'll be repeated as kind of undisputed fact in American media. Whereas if someone were to question those allegations, immediately they'll be hit with, well, what's your source on that? Are you an Assad apologist? and this is just the bias, right? That things that feed a particular narrative are treated as if they are just undisputedly true, and anything that counters their narrative is treated with the highest suspicion, right? This guy said it. He's the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. It matches what we all know about the Syrian government, whereas somebody else comes forward and asks some questions. Oh, wait, who's paying you? Is Assad paying you to say that? I mean, and this is how this stuff works. This is how you create a narrative. It's how you demonize a government. The fact that they refer to the Syrian Arab Republic, a country with multiple political parties, multiple religious groups, they just say Assad, right? We're supposed to get this image of a bad guy in our head, of a bad leader who needs to be overthrown or something, right? When they would attack Iraq and kill children and, bomb hospitals and prevent children from getting medical care, they would say, well, we bombed Saddam today. It's the same way of demonizing a country. It's deeply, deeply unfortunate.
He's Assad. He's a dictator of a regime, Caleb, and bin Salman. He's the prince of a kingdom. That's the way it works. I want to, while I've got you, I know you've only got an hour, so I want to start on this quick because it's something that it was trending on Twitter yesterday. Marxism was trending on Twitter. Apparently, you probably won't know who this is, you being American, but the Vicar of Dibley is now a Marxist. Apparently, Vicar of Dibley. She's a Marxist, according to Twitter. I've got a old joke, Caleb, and it's basically the people who are on Twitter accusing others of being a Marxist. I've got a feeling that half of them have never read Marx and the other half have never read a book at all. I haven't read Marx. I've been accused of being a Marxist in my mentions. I've seen them many times. What is it? What is Marxism? Can you explain it to me, Caleb? Because honestly, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know what Leninism is. I don't know what Trotskyist, although the Labour Party apparently call everybody a trot if you don't agree with them. Can you shed any light on this? And why am I a Marxist? And also, why is it bad to be one? Because it seems to be Marxist. It's bad apparently. Is it? I don't know.
Well, Marxism is scientific socialism. Pick
up your guns then. I mean,
well, socialism is just this understanding that maybe having everything based on profits isn't a good idea, right? And it's been around for a long time, even before, as capitalism was emerging, you had religious institutions criticizing it and such. But Marx applied modern scientific thinking to the concept of socialism, developed the understanding that history is moving forward like a train. It's speeding forward. And we've gone from hunter-gatherer civilization to slavery to feudalism. From that emerges capitalism. And the next stage in human development is a society where the major banks and industries and centers of economic power are organized to serve public good and not profits. And that would be socialism. And then eventually socialism, the hope is, could give way to an even higher stage of development with so much abundance and so much prosperity that maybe the need for a government could fade away. And that would be the ultimate vision of communism. And that was the scientific Marxist theory. The idea that there are the workers and the capitalists, there are those who own the major industries and those who sell their labor power in order to survive. And there's a class struggle between them, rooted in the philosophical concept of dialectical materialism, that all that exists in the world is material, is matter, but that matter is constantly in a state of motion and constantly changing, that no two things in the world are alike. You never step into the same river twice. It's a philosophical movement that came out of the period in the 1800s as capitalism was emerging as a new system, and people saw that maybe this world where money comes first is having some problems. And out of that, we get the revolutionary current of Karl Marx and Engels. That's Marxism.
Okay. All right. And this is bad. Why?
I don't think it's bad at all. I mean, and I think Marxists were among the greatest progressives and reformers in our history. Women wouldn't have the vote in your country or our country if it weren't for Marxists. Marxists built the labor movement. Marxists were key in struggling against racism. Marxists have been on the vanguard of all progressive struggles that we've seen. Abraham Lincoln, our president here in the United States, one of our most beloved presidents, had a Marxist general in his army named August Willich. And, Roosevelt met with Marxist labor organizers at the White House. I mean, I don't think it's bad at all.
Okay. The reason I ask is because everybody who gets called it's an insult. You can see that people are using it as an insult, and I just think you've never read it, have you? Because whenever I look into it, I just think, well, hold on a minute. Look at the system we've got at the moment, capitalism. Look at the word, capitalism. The person who gets ahead, the person who does the best, is the person who has the most capital. Correct? That's the way it's.
Yeah.
So the person who's got the most capital, what you're breeding then is a system where the people who cut the most corners and get away with cutting the most corners, they're the people who get the most capital, and they're the people who therefore end up with the most power and money. And we have got a tax system in this country and in America that rewards people who lie and punishes people who tell the truth. So if you tell the truth about how much you earn, you're going to pay 40% tax or whatever it is. If you lie, you're going to pay 0 because, hey, I can get away with it. It's capitalism. We are literally saying to the worst kinds of people in the world, the socialists and the psychopaths, to say, we've built this system for you. It's great. And now we're in 2020 and the world's on fire and we're thinking, I don't get why this experiment hasn't turned out, Caleb.
Sure.
Didn't Marx actually predict this?
Well, indeed.
The state of the world right now?
Right. I mean, one of the things that Marx developed was this understanding that capitalism is constantly revolutionizing technology, right? And developing new technology. The capitalist wants to make products as efficiently as possible. He wants to maximize his profits, wants to hire as few workers as possible, pay those workers as little as he possibly can to maximize his own profits. However, when you do that, the result is that a lot of people don't have jobs, or those who do have jobs don't get paid very much. And pretty soon they can't pay back, they can't buy the products they're producing. And this creates a glut of overproduction. And that when there are huge leaps in technology, the result is a prolonged capitalist crisis because the products that are being created cannot be sold. And the computer revolution is really, this is exactly what Marx talked about in his writings. The idea that, now we have, 3D printers, I mean, there's so many examples you can point to. We have a system where you just don't need assembly line workers. And that's all well and good for the capitalists for a while because they don't have to pay any workers, but pretty soon no one can buy those products. And you have an underclass of people, millions of people who have no place in the global assembly line. And this is creating a crisis. And the working class built this world, but now has no place in it because you only work so long as a capitalist can make a profit from hiring you. And if a capitalist can't make a profit from your labor, you don't work. And so millions of people have no place in the global assembly line. So now the elites are talking about overpopulation. There's just too many people in the world, right? And we're entering a period where I think capitalism is facing its end. Meanwhile, if you look at China, where they have a state centrally planned socialist economy. I mean, there's a lot of free markets, a lot of private corporations, but at the end of the day, the means of production, the centers of economic power are controlled by the state. They're zooming ahead because they have rational central planning at the head of the economy, not the irrationality of profits, right? Profits are not in command. The Communist Party is. And because of that, they have seen unprecedented expansion and growth. They don't have the irrational cycle of the market that you have to have human reason and central planning dictating production, not just whatever is profitable for all the different capitalists.
So, okay. There's a couple of things. First of all, my favorite fact about, you're totally right about China. My favorite fact about China is they're building 7,000 miles of motorway a year. That's like 7,000 miles of freeways a year. And these are not freeways, like these are up in the mountains. And, they're just, the way that they can just say, right, okay, we need this, and throw an amount of resources and material at something. It's insane. It really is. You recently saw them build that hospital in a week or whatever it is when COVID hit at the beginning of the year. The second thing I want to ask is, right, okay, if you imagine, see, I think about money in the way of, I've come to learn that our system of money is sort of like a fugazi. It's kept alive. It's kept alive by stupidity and wishful thinking. Sort of really, that's the system that we've got. So I feel as if you are a country, you know what your output is. You know how much you eat. You know how much you use for light. You know how much, wind power you need. You know how much gas power you need. You've got all these things that you can record how much you need. So then you're like, well, okay. My initial thought, and this is something that I've been thinking about more and more recently, is, well, what percentage of our output as a country, if you look at what our output is, and not in a way of GDP, I'm talking actually modern monetary theory, what percentage of that we need to put aside to say, right, okay, we're Great Britain, we're great. If you're in this country, you get a roof over your head, a meal, health service, and an education. And you get that because you're British and you're great. What percentage of the output do you think that would be? And what percentage would it be in relation to the military budget, for instance? I know you've got a gigantic one over there that's just been put through. Am I on the right way of thinking as to, like, a better way? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we have an economy in the United States that's centered around military production. Really, after World War II, we started to adopt the Nazi economic methods of using military spending to stimulate the economy. This is what Hallomer Schacht did in Nazi Germany, right? Nazi Germany had a failing economy, so Hallomer Schacht came into power, and the Nazis, not only did they restart military spending and use that to stimulate the economy, they built some giant highways, and then after that, they set up a network of concentration camps, and this is basically how our economy works in the United States. It's the government spends money on prisons and tanks and bombs, and it keeps the economy rolling ahead. Meanwhile, our population gets poorer and poorer. There are parts of the country that don't have water that's properly purified. People are drinking lead in their water. The country is falling apart. People are getting addicted to opioids. Our roads are crumbling. But hey, they're building more prisons. They're building more bombs and tanks, and that's capitalism.
Yeah, the prison system in America, I was only reading about it yesterday. This is a fact that I picked up yesterday, I say a fact, I mean, this is according to a study that they did. Black Americans are 13% of the population and 33% of the prison population. White Americans are 63% of the population and 30% of the prison population. So I think you're 5 times more likely to be in prison if you're white and black in America. Doesn't matter whether you're a criminal or not.
Indeed. And I mean, prisons for profit is a reality in the United States. We have private prisons where there are private companies that get paid by the government per prisoner. Now, what could possibly go wrong with that?
Well, I mean, if you're making money from prisoners, then it makes sense in the capitalistic system that you want more prisoners, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, and that's we've done that in the United States, and we've turned locking people in prison for crime into a way to make money.
Who's the architect of all this, Caleb? This locking up black and brown people. Who was the architect of it?
Well, I mean, I think the push for prisons for profit, in particular, that came from Milton Friedman and the neoliberal economic reforms. But I mean, you can talk about the war on drugs and the Rockefeller drug laws that were first applied here in New York and then expanded in the 1980s. The Reagan administration really oversaw a rise in the prison industrial complex. But the Democrats really, I mean, Bill Clinton very much was an architect of these policies in Arkansas, and then pushed them as he was governor of Arkansas, and then later became president. Joe Biden was all about the crime bill, the infamous crime bill. He's got a record of pushing for mass incarceration.
The crime bill, is that the 3 strikes and you're out thing?
Well, that's in different states. They have that.
Was it?
Yeah. This was the federal crime bill that imposed very, very harsh penalties that Joe Biden very much wrote himself, and it was supported by the Clinton administration with all kinds of rhetoric about super predators. This idea that there are these young people out there that are pretty clearly hinting that they're people of color, and that they just their brains are damaged, and they're a menace to society. It was a very, very racist racist scare, and the population was kind of whipped up to support mass incarceration. But Kamala Harris, I mean, she comes out of California. She was a prosecutor. She rose up to being the attorney general of the state, and she was all about mass incarceration. Look, I mean, we've got a situation where the capitalists in the United States, the factory owners, they're not making profits from hiring people. They don't need people at the assembly line, so we're turning people into a commodity to make money from in the prison system. And I mean, it's similar to what happened with opioids, right? I mean, there's a huge opioid epidemic. People are dying from opioid addiction because the big drug companies basically decided to start pushing doctors to overprescribe opioid medications because they could make a profit from it. I mean, this is really, when you have a society where money comes first, where the rule of profits is unlimited and unrestrained, you're going to get disastrous things. And overall, the United States is moving in a very, very dangerous direction. I say we're headed toward a low-wage police state. That's what's happening right now. And as the system is crashing and burning, as the capitalists are fighting among themselves, different factions are trying to gain power over each other, and the working class is being left behind.
That doesn't paint a very good picture at all, mate. What do you think people can do? How do you think they can change this? Because if you create a society like that, where you've got a small percentage of extremely rich people and a society where, you know, there's mass poverty, there's mass unemployment, there's also great censorship. We've done these experiments before, and we know that they don't end well. So is there anything that, you know, American people can do? I keep saying to the American people, well, I mean, if you're given a kabuki theater, and you're in an oligarchy now, I've lost my shit with people on Twitter, Caleb, who keep saying democracy's at stake. No, you're in an oligarchy. You know, it doesn't matter whether there's 80-90% support for something. If there's no money behind it, and if the people with money don't want it, you're not going to get it. It's the very definition of an oligarchy. So how can Americans, is there anything in your constitution that you can do? I know you always, Americans are always talking about the constitution. Is there anything that you can look at in your constitution to try and change this? Because we've just watched a shit show, the world has, in your election between Trump and Biden, two people that seemingly, I haven't met an American yet who said that they want either of them. Honestly, they would rather pick anybody else. Is there anything that you can do, or are you just, you know, destined to ride this out until somebody worse than Trump comes along? Because that's where it's going, isn't it?
Well, change in the United States has historically come from people getting involved and building community and organizations to assert their rights, not necessarily only at the ballot box, but in their communities, things like labor unions, things like the unemployment councils, people's assemblies. This is how the working class has asserted its power historically in the United States. But the main thing right now is that there needs to be an ideological shift. We have been told in the United States that the government is best that governs least. Laissez-faire is the way, hands off. And I've been trying to popularize the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families, because that is really what is needed right now. We have a government that sits back and lets the country crumble and lets the corporations loot us. But the notion that we could have popular power, we could have a government that fought for average people and drew its strength from community organizations and all of that, that needs to be introduced into the populace. You know, we have really been inculcated with these kind of libertarian, free market, you know, get the government off our backs ideas, and it's led to things getting worse and worse and worse. And we need an ideological shift. People need to understand that that socialism isn't a dirty word, and that there are countries like, you know, the former Soviet Union, like China, that have raised millions from poverty by having a government that doesn't draw its power simply from corporations, that is rooted in communities and popular struggles and mobilizes the population to build and construct and move ahead. I think Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was probably our greatest president. And he was probably the closest thing to a socialist we ever had in the White House. Yeah. He wasn't a socialist. But, you know, if you look at his Works Progress administration, where he, you know, hired the unemployed to build things all throughout the United States. You look at how he aligned with the labor unions. You know, Roosevelt was a great leader of the United States, not afraid to work with socialists and communists and revolutionaries to get things done. And he's still widely loved for his great achievements, you know, and some of that Rooseveltian optimistic, constructive spirit. Let's build a new country. Let's protect working people from the greed of the bankers. Roosevelt used to condemn what he called do-nothing government. And that's what we have right now. We have do-nothing government. Government that sits on its hands and lets the country fall to pieces. And I say, as I've tried to repeat, we need a government of action that will fight for working families.
740 billion you've just passed as a bipartisan war budget, let's face, a war chest. Yet, how long are the lines at the food banks? It's insane. It really is. I mean, over there, it seems that you've got a government of do nothing. Over here, we haven't so much as got anybody that governs us. We've got a bunch of toffs and royals who rule over us. That's what we've got over here and what we're fighting. I somehow feel we're going to be fighting that for the rest of time. Though. I wanted to. I've got 15 minutes left. I want to talk to you a little bit. First of all, is there anything that you wanted to come on and talk to me about? I keep saying I wanted to talk to you about this. Is there anything you wanted to highlight that's on your mind at the moment?
Well, I do know. I just want to say that you are somebody who has done a great job highlighting the case of Julian Assange, and I want to commend you for that, because we're all paying close attention to that case. You know, the whole world is watching what's happening there, and there's a huge effort by our media to just, you know, to just push that out of the public light. And thank you for your work highlighting, you know, what's going on with Julian Assange.
Thank you, but honestly, what I've done is minuscule compared to some of the. Honestly, I've met some of the most wonderful people, Caleb, in this movement. Honestly, the people in the Julian Assange movement, they know what's true, they know what justice is, they know honesty, they know what is right and what is wrong and what is fair, and above all, they all have a moral center that just says what we've done here. It's, well, first, if history remembers Julian Assange, that's the thing. If he's remembered, because they came for the journalists, and we don't know what happened after that. But I feel as if he is remembered, the people who have detracted him and the people who didn't fight for him, they are going to so wish they were, because I feel as if he's that important. People are going to ask, what did you do when Julian Assange was in prison? I feel as if people in 10, 20 years, people's children and grandchildren are going to be saying to them, if he is remembered and if they don't extradite him, and they dare not do, I think that's how important he is. And it's, if he wrote me a letter, and I was already well in, you know, in his corner, and in the corner of what he stands for is journalism, is perfect journalism. Let's face it. That's what is created, is perfect journalism. And if you have perfect journalism, you have perfect democracy. Correct? Those are the two things and if people understand that, they will understand the weight of what he represents. And I hope that justice will prevail, although I have got no confidence in it whatsoever, Caleb. I think the fix is in with this. I think I listen to people like Dominic Raab over here, and him saying that today on Twitter that, we don't recognize the government of Venezuela. We don't recognize the National Assembly. We still recognize Juan Guaido. It's like, Dominic, more Venezuelans have heard of you than have heard of Juan Guaido. And you think that he's just, shall we go and declare somebody else president of France? Shall we? Because Macron's rating is a bit ridiculous. And to call Venezuela's elections shambolic, I'm sorry, is an absolute joke when you actually look at them. Because I've looked at them. These are fingerprint analysis. There are 51% of the boxes get audited, and it's a public audit, right? And it's verified that night. You know, this is an incredible system that was at one stage lauded by President Jimmy Carter, although I noticed he has wheeled that back a little bit since and said that people have used it politically, etc. But you know, they're flinging shit at other countries saying your democracy is not valid. Well, hold on a minute, Rob. You know, let's have a look at Jeremy Corbyn. Let's have a look at his own party, you know, hijacking his 2017 bid here. You're calling that a democracy? You won't care about that because you benefited. But what if that was Tories? What if that happened inside the Tory party? Well, then you would say a democracy is a sham, wouldn't it? And they're going around pointing, you know, fingers at other countries saying your democracy is not a sham. Look at what you're doing to Julian Assange. The guy from, was it, who is it? The BBC interviewed somebody from, I think it was Macedonia or something like that. They were interviewing, Caleb, a verified war criminal. This is a war criminal. This is properly, from what I can tell, a nasty guy. And he's sitting there saying to the BBC reporter, what about what you're doing to Julian Assange? And the reporter can't say a damn thing. Why? Because you cannot stand on moral high ground if a war criminal can point at you and go, look at what you're doing in your capital right now. And that's why we all need to stand up for Julian Assange. All of it. Because in his letter to me, as I was going to say, in his letter to me, let me just finish this off. He ended it with, truth ultimately is all we have. And that's what I'm fighting for, the truth.
Well, the fact that the press has been so weak in speaking up around the case is really revealing, because what he's speaking up for is their freedom to do what they do, right? Julian Assange is a publisher, right? That's what he does. He published things, right? And if they were to, you know, go after and ultimately prosecute and imprison Julian Assange for publishing, that would create a precedent where, you know, I mean, it's one thing if you work for the government and you leak something, right? But if the press suddenly can, you know, be jailed, imprisoned for publishing things, right? That creates an atmosphere where suddenly, you know, we could see a situation where we would have to call the government up before we publish something. So, oh, this isn't classified, is it? Oh, well, like, I guess it is now. And the fact that the press is not speaking up for Assange shows that they haven't been doing their jobs. They have no intention of doing their jobs. Right? I mean, if they were legitimately doing their jobs and questioning power and trying to expose things, they would be very worried about what's happening with Assange. But they haven't been doing their jobs for a long time, and they have no fear of that their ability to do that will be restricted because so much of our media in the United States, they call it a free press, but it's just a puppet. It's a puppetry of the power structure in the United States, that they repeat what the intelligence agencies and what the Pentagon and what the State Department want us to hear. And then, of course, then they label any media that dares ask real questions, they label as foreign propaganda. I mean, it's surreal. It's really, really surreal what we're seeing. So, you know, the fact that they have sat back and let Julian Assange, you know, be persecuted for what they themselves are supposed to be doing and claim to be doing, even though they're not, really reveals everything you need to know about them.
Don't we need, I just want to touch on this lastly, if you don't mind, don't we need a free speech platform, Caleb, somewhere actually decentralized? We can do it with, you know, Microsoft Office, for Christ's sake. We've got plenty of variations of that. Isn't there somewhere where we can have an open source system built where people can say not only what they want without repercussions, but also, I mean, I'm thinking that we need a free speech platform, where you can't be anonymous. You need to go on there and verify who you are, because you need to have repercussions for what you say. But not only will that teach people to wind what they're saying a little bit, but it'll also teach people to stop this cancel culture a little bit more, because everybody, you know, makes mistakes. But also, wouldn't it, I mean, I'm sure we can create a platform that promotes when two sides that disagree with each other start agreeing, that promotes you know, talks like this where people like ourselves are talking and we're bouncing ideas off each other, but necessarily not two people who are on the left like we are, but, you know, maybe talk to somebody on the right, etc. Because what I find is when you talk to people who are, you know, let's say they're on the right or they're on the left or whatever, opposite to where you are on the political spectrum, I find that when you talk to them, you agree with 95% of what they say. But the 5% that you don't agree on, that's the bit that the media makes out is everything. It's 100%. So the 95% that you agree on, you don't get. Why? Because the media are making out that it's not important. They're making out that anti-Semitism is the biggest thing, and that's the thing that everybody's talking about right now. Not the fact that they, you know, are worried where their next meal is coming from. No, it's the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. That's the big thing. And I feel as if we need a new platform to replace this old archaic media, because I am honestly of the opinion where we're better off not having them at all, because to be uninformed is far better, far safer, and causes a lot less damage than being misinformed. And that's exactly what we've got right now. What do you think?
It's only a matter of time. Because if you look at history, you know, sure, the first time that you had a printing press in Europe, it was in the hands of the Catholic Church. And they said, look, we've got this cutting edge technology. Okay. We can print our own village Bible. We can print our indulgences. But it was only a matter of time before critics of the Catholic Church, critics of the feudal order, got their hands on a printing press as well. And that led to a huge social explosion based on a new level of freedom of information. Now, I think the same thing has gone for social media. Right now, yes, you know, the Silicon Valley elites that are tied in with the NSA and the CIA, they have the monopoly on Twitter and Facebook and all of that. But give it time.
We can't have them deciding what is and is acceptable speech, can we? We can't, with all due respect, Jack, I know you didn't envisage you were going to have this problem 10, 12 years ago when you created Twitter, but you've got it now, and you can't act like a publisher and then say we're not. Can you?
Indeed, and it's only a matter of time before alternatives are sprouting up, before they lose their monopoly. And that's why there's this weird push and pull going on. If you see the hearings that are taking place, there's a big demand that, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter and other things censor more. And they're resisting the drive to do that because they know the more that they engage in censorship, they're going to expedite that process. They're just going to push their competitors ahead. So they're resisting the push. Washington and a lot of the you know, corporations are demanding that Facebook censor more, and they are censoring people and they are shutting people down, as we've seen, but they're afraid to do it because they know it's only a matter of time. The clock is ticking and they're going to lose their monopoly. This is how history works, right? And that pretty soon there's going to be an alternative to the tech monopolies. There's going to be other platforms out there, and pretty soon there's going to be a much more level playing field when it comes to social media and the interactions that go on there. And it's only a matter of time, and they're very afraid of this. They're afraid of this, and they see the fact that, look, you know, in the United States, while we have just, you know, allowed our country to crumble, while we aren't even training people to be scientists and engineers, you go over to China, they're producing some of the greatest breakthroughs in alternative energy, the greatest engineers and scientists. You know, I mean, it's only a matter of time, and they know it. They're going to lose their grip, their control over the information world, and it's only a matter of time. And that's why Julian Assange is such a threat to them. Right? Is freedom of information. The control of information is a way that they've been able to maintain their power.
Mate, thanks so much for coming on, Caleb. Just to touch on what you said, you ended with there. Can you imagine, like, if we did, if a country was to say, right, okay, if you're great, if you're in Britain, then because we're great, if you're British, you get a roof over your head, you get a meal in your belly, you get light, you get heat, you get water, etc. If you say to everybody, you get that as a basic, how many more Einsteins and Hawkings and how many more of those people are we going to create, rather than crush them under a weight of student debt and under a weight of, I don't know, credit card debt and making up for their fathers and their previous generations' mistakes. I envisage that if we do get a platform that's free of speech and allows us to talk, and like we have today, we'll have a better future and more Einsteins. What do you reckon?
I think you're onto something.
Thanks so much, Caleb. Where can people find you?
I'm at calebmaupin.com, CALEBMAUPIN.com. You can also check me out on YouTube. I stream pretty regularly. I have great chats with my viewers. I've got some published books out there. So, yeah, very good.
I'm a big fan, Caleb. Thanks very much for what you do, and keep fighting.
All right. Well, I'm a fan of yours, too, and it was a pleasure to come on and chat with you.
Pleasure.